Revelation. Muni, Kidamuni, Mikeshe, Marbes, Barley, Vitsarli, Ekra, Dinai, Elihai, Ashavea, Yishmami, Halar, Kai, Bishab, Alsi, the Fanat, the Vibe, the Ovnav, the Tig Ash, the Tir Ash, Aretz, the Moistade, Harim, Yirgazu, Isgashu, Kicharaloi. Allah Shan Be'achoy, Be'ish Mitiv Tosheo, Be'cholim Be'aru, B'manu, Be'yet Shomrai Be'girad, Be'arafel, Chachas Raglav, Yirkav Al, Kuruv Yira'oi, Be'yeda Al Kamfei Ruba, Yashas Be'shech, Sisrois of Levoisav, Sukaisai, Kashkas, Maim Ave, Shechakim, Nagda Nagdaya Rav Be'avaru Vara Begachale Eish Yar Ein Vashamayim Adinai Be'al Yon Yitain Kaloi Vara Begachale Eish Yishlach Iksavi Viti Seim Rakim Rav Di Rumeim Yirau Afike Mayim Yigalu Maisidais Tevel Biga Arasafa Adinai Minishmas Ruach Apapa Yishlach mi maroi yitladeini yam sheni mi ma'inabe yatileni mi oyeve umistoine ai ki ametsu mi mani yikademuni b'yom idei yadina lemish andi yikseini lemerchav yikaletzeni ki chafetz bi yiglaleni adinai kitsid ki kevor yadai yashivli Ki Shimarti Darkei Adinai will Rashati the Alihai. Ki Ho Mishpatav Lenagbi with Mukaisab Loy Asir Nandi. But at he Samim Imai at Kamer and Avoini. Yasher Adinai interested Ki Kevar Yadai Lenagad Inav. Im Nasid Kiskasad. Im Gavartamim Itamam. Im Navar, Kisparar, in Kesh, Kispatol, Kiata Am, Anisashia, Benayim Ramois Tashpil, Kiata Sair Neri, Adonai Elohai, Yagia, Pashki, Kiveta Arut, Gedud, Uveloi Hai Edaleg Shore, Ha'el Tamim Darkai, Ras Adinai Tulufa, Magain Rulakov, Hafai Sin, Boy, Kimi Elahai, Ibalade Adinai, Mitzur Zubasi Elohino, Ha'el Kame Azreini, Kayo Yitim Tamim Darki, Shav Rakagla, Eka Arya Lois, Rakal Bamoisa, Yani Devi, Elamed Yada, Elamil. Beneath the saw Kashas Levusha as a ray eyesight, yet eat them the Maginish Akla, Naka, Sis Ardani, the Anvasaka, Tarbani, Tarkim, Tadi, Kai Baloima Adu, Karsulai, Erdo Fayavai the Asigay, Beloyashub Ad Kalaisam, and Faksim Beloya Yuchulu, Kum Yipulu, Takas Ragloi. As a radiant dial milk Akria Kamai, Akai, Oivine, Yasakali, Oiva, Yumfan I asked me saying, Yishaba Ub Ain Moishi, Al Adinai Light Alam, Dash by Tame, Afar, Alpane Rula, the Pitkusai, Sari came, Kafalatani, Mary May. Disney Lorai Squarium Am Loyadati Abduli Shema Oizen Joshua Uzi the Nene Car Ifat Ashuli Nene Car Iboilulia Rigum Bis Kiroi Seham Kai Adinai Baruch Turi the Arum Elohe Yishbi Hael Hanai Sene Kamois Iliad there Amim Balatim Oyevoi, Afmin Kamai to run the name, Ishkamas, Tata, Patilani, Alkane Oilecha, Vagayim, Sadina, Yushimcha, Zamera, Magil Yishuais Nokai, like the Kassan and Shikai, the David Uzarai, Atmal.
Or look up here at the Noiro Vilo Exar. Stashi are saying Yamim Nukosina Lani Nafshi Shovev, Yancheni B'Maglei Tzedek, L'man Shemo, Gam Ki Elech B'Geit Salmaves, Lo Irara Ki Atoi Modi, Shiftecho Mishantecha, Hemi Rachamuni, Tarok L'Fonai Shulchan Neged Zoroi, Shantav Hashemen Roshi Kosir Vayah, Achtov Chesed Yirtefuni Koi Mechayoi, Shafti B'Veis Adonai Yorech Yomim. Together, they cover our own final respects, final honors to Mrs. Florence Binstock Avigan. She was a person to whom her interpersonal relations were clearly very valuable and very important, but it was also quite clear that family were the most important relations in her life. We'll begin with hearing from family members, grandson Rabbi Daniel Prince.
Typically, when a grandson says that he wouldn't be here to have his grandmother, it usually means in a genetic fashion. But 1978, my parents left me in Savta's care and suffered seizures, and Savta literally made it that I was here today. She always told me that since then we had a special bond. I can affirm that we definitely had that. And I hope I reciprocated it and appreciated it as much as I could while she was here. Savta was a lifelong teacher. She taught in the Montgomery County Public Schools for 51 years until she was 91. Although I was never a student in her classroom, she wasn't well versed in the classic Jewish sources beyond the Chumash. When I reflect on my time spent with her, I find that I learned many valuable Torah lessons. And I'd like to share some of them with you. Mishnah in Pirkei Avos counts the midah of ayin tova as a trait that we should seek to emulate. It's defined by the Mefarshim as mistapek b'muat by some, which means someone who is happy with simple means, and also as someone who looks for the good in others. Despite Savta physically having only one good eye, she certainly had this midah. She was the embodiment of mistapek b'muat. Even at times when she could afford luxury, she never sought it out. She was always looking for the good in others. She would often tell me about people and highlight their good midos. She is such a kind person, or he is a real people person. Her best compliment that she once gave was that she's almost as good as cook as your mother. Rarely did she say anything negative about anybody, and even if she did, she always said, but I know that they mean well. Mentioned she taught 51 years in public schools. She once told me that she once lost her cool and yelled at the students. Once. I taught not anywhere near 51 years, and I can't imagine that. And then right after, she reprimanded herself and said, you're really not supposed to do that. And I just stood there in awe, sat there in awe on her couch. And of course, over time, she mentioned that many times. But to me, that was a life lesson. I recently listened to an interview that my daughter Aviva did with Savta in 2019. And she asked her, what's the most important thing in your life? She said, family. Savta didn't just say things like that, she lived it. Her 3 children, 17 grandchildren, I don't know the exact number, but over 50 great-grandchildren and 2 great-great-grandchildren were precious to her, each and every individual one. She called all of her children often, made sure to call her grandchildren every Friday. Once in a while, I was able to beat her to it. She really appreciated that. She told me often how much she really valued having so much family nearby. And I assured her that we appreciated her being so close as well. Savta had many famous quotes, and although they're not meant to be Torah lessons, I think we can learn from them. I'm not going to tell you all of them. I'll have to stick around for more, but some of the more famous ones, I guess. Her most famous and most often said quote would be, it'll be what it will be, or alternatively, whatever will be, will be. We have to recognize that everything goes our way. We're not in control. We need to accept what Hashem has in store for us and not worry so much about it. You can't do better than your best. I've said many times, that she, many times she said this, she mentioned this in the context of our own achievements, our own lives, but her students, she always expected them to do their best, but not, you only have so much that you can do. We all have our potential. We all have a tafkid in life, a role to fulfill. And that's what is expected from us. And we have to work on achieving it. But you have to remember, we're human and we can't do better than your best. Something, I don't know if it's so much of a quote, but she definitely told this to me often. I would tell her something that I was teaching or something, and she said, "Oh, that's something I haven't heard. I try to learn something new every day." This relates to, the Gemara says in a few places that that anybody who learns halacha every day, two halachas every day, he's assured his place in Olam Haba. And it says halichos olam lo, that going of the world is for him, and it darshans that means halachos. The emphasis here is there's a kol yom every day. Like Savta said, she tries to learn something new every day. But I think it's also that it's expressed with this idea of halichos olam lo. We're constantly on the move. If you're satisfied with where you are, you're not going to want to learn. Savta was never satisfied with what she had in that sense, and she always wanted to learn more through her reading. Savta was always looking to grow more. Even, I don't know many people that got married at 83 and started another life, not another life, but a new chapter. Again, every day was met with the simcha of that day. We need to learn from that to be consistent and in constant growth mode. This is something that Savta lived and was consistent with. There's a lot more, but we'll save that for other speakers and for during Shiva. Many more quotes. Someone must have written them all down at some point. Just want to end with, I want to thank my mother and Howie for the innumerable work and care they put in taking care of Savta, especially during these last difficult 16 or so months, but many years. You are both a shining example of kibbutz, and we stand in awe of you. We love you and hope that we have learned from and will live by your example. Savta, we ask you to be a Litza Yosher for your family, your community, and all of Klal Yisrael. Bila Hashem, Bila Hamaz, Lenetzach, U'mach Hashem, Dim Miyakol.
Son-in-law, Dr. Howie Shomrai.
Rabbanim, family, friends. Karen has asked me to speak in her place today to honor her mother, my dear mother-in-law, Florence Binstock Avigan, Freda Shifra Bas Meir, known to her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren as Savta. I believe that the Israeli branch of the family called her Savta Levana, not mistaken. And my grandsons called her Super Savta. And I think that really categorizes what she was. She was a super Savta. Savta led a very long and full life. Karen loves to relate family stories and history. So let me start with a very abridged family history. Savta, forgive me for condensing your very rich and varied 99 years into a few minutes. I know that you would likely very kindly say that it is what it is. The Platel family was one of two Jewish families in Coalport, Pennsylvania. Our parents, Manuel and Bessie Platel, had two children, Florence, aka Savta, and her kid brother, Philip, aka Uncle Phil. She was valedictorian in her high school class and attended Penn State University on a full academic scholarship. This is at a time where even a college education for women was quite unique. At that time, the closest kosher butchers were in the great metropolis of Altoona, Pennsylvania. When the butcher they had been using got a bit mouthy with Bessie Plattel, she switched to the other kosher butcher store owned by Ben Binstock. Bessie and young Florence, home from college at that time, went to the store where the butcher's son, Leonard Binstock, also home from college, spied the lovely Florence, who later wrote to her parents asking for permission to contact their daughter. What a different time. The rest is history. And one might say, in this context, that the Binstock Butcher Store really could be called a meat market. Operating with divine intervention in the case of Savta and Saba. After serving in the Army in the Pacific in World War II, Saba returned to the States, and he and his bride moved to Philadelphia, where Karen was born, and then moved to State College, Pennsylvania, where Saba earned his master's degree. They had blessed with 2 more children, Joy, now known as Yocheved, and Mark. Forgive me, Karen, for the sake of time, unlike in yesterday's Parsha, where every stop on the Jews' journey through the Midbar was mentioned, I'm going to skip some of the steps and the stops on the Binstock's journey, so you'll please forgive me for that. The Binstocks moved to Silver Spring, where they settled near the old Shomrai on University Boulevard. Saba worked as a research scientist at the NIH, and when he finally agreed that it would be okay for his wife to work, and it took a while. He was a little old school in that regard, I believe, so I've been told. Saba began to work as a substitute teacher in Montgomery County high schools, teaching every subject as needed, including, we were told, boys' gym on one occasion. Don't ask me for detail. She retired from teaching at the age of 91. When she was 90, there was a reception in her honor, and it was a news piece on NBC News. Unfortunately, the whole thing has not been saved, but you can still Google it. You got it. Miriam, okay. When Saba had health issues, they sold their home on Oxford Terrace, moved into University Towers, where Safta resided until Purim of 2024, when she fell and broke her pelvis. Faced with either living in her apartment with an aide or moving to assisted living, Safta said she did not want anyone, quote, hovering over her. That was Safta. And she decided instead to go into assisted living, making sure she found those that we would be able to find for her was strictly kosher. Safta was an avid reader, averaging 2 books a week for a good part of her life. She was the president of the Shomrai Sisterhood, when that committee played a major role in the shul. She served as a member of the Shomrai Board of Directors, and in fact was on the board during one of my stints as president. It's very helpful to have somebody that I really couldn't count on her, but she was going to speak up. So she was not a sure I vote. She loved to knit, and besides knitting baby blankets for many of her great grandchildren, she also knitted caps for newborns at Holy Cross Hospital, and huge numbers of them. And in the closet in her part now, we have boxes of yarn. Anybody who'd like it, please approach me after Shiva. After almost 10 years of widowhood, after Saba's death, she was blessed to meet and fall in love with Dr. Joel Avigan, aka Saba Joel, when she was almost 84 and he was 90 years old. We're blessed to have them marry the last ceremony that Rabbeinu Zichron Livracha performed at our house. Anyone who watched them together were amazed at their vibrancy and caring for each other. The major focus of Savta's life, as Rabbi Kramer has already mentioned, was her family. Up until the last year and a half of her life, she would place calls to as many of her grandchildren as she could reach every Erev Shabbos. Hashem blessed her with 3 grandchildren from Karen, Miriam, Danny, and Adina, 9 from Joy, Yocheved, Israel, Abital, Shmuel, Daniel, Maishi, Nati, Sarah, Itzik, and Batya. and 3 from Mark, Abi, Shana, and David. And from the time that Karen and I got married, she always counted my 2 daughters, Adina and Tali, among the grandchildren, leaving a total now of 17 grandchildren. She loved each of them and their spouses very much, very, very much. Then there were the 52 plus great-grandchildren. And don't worry, I'm not going to give you all the names of those. And most recently, 2 great-great-grandchildren. We have pictures of her with each of the great-great-grandchildren on her lap with a big smile on her face. Up until a few years ago, she could not only name all of them, but could recall their birthdays by heart. I barely can remember my own. She loved to bake and bring her chocolate chip cookies or a cake she made when she came to one of the family for a Shabbos meal. As we move towards Rosh Hashanah, I'm reminded of the pasuk in Shema Kolenu, Al tashlichenu le'esikna, kichlos kochenu al tarvenu. Do not cast me off in the time of old age when my strength fails. Do not forsake me. I was zocheh to witness family and friends answer this tefillah in the way they loved and cared for Savta to her very last day. Savta visiting a family and family visiting her were among her greatest pleasures. You gave her so much pleasure by your visits and phone calls to her over the years. And she knew that if it were more possible, there would be more frequent visits and coming from all over the world. What you did was unbelievable. You could see it in her face. Over the course of the last year and a half, as her health issues increased, Karen, my dear wife, stepped up to help Savta maintain her dignity. She visited Savta for close to 6 days a week and 7 when Shabbos ended early. Family members kept up by phone and many, many in-person visits coming from near and far, from this country and other countries, as often as possible. I won't go on for the sake of time. Anyhow, how do you capture and summarize 99 years? I want to thank both the family and also members of the community who visited with her on many occasions in Landau. It meant so much to her. I want to thank Rabbi Rosenbaum for his visits and caring and his support of us in this difficult time. I say that this is a sad one for us, but it's not a tragic one. We are so blessed to have had Savta in our lives for so many years, to be able to watch her walk down the aisle of great-grandchildren and hold in her arms the great-great-grandchildren. What a bracha. Hashem really was exceedingly, exceedingly kind to her, and she certainly deserved every bit of it. Savta, we love you so much. We've been blessed to have had you in our lives. May you be a Melis Yosher for the entire family and the community. Karen and I ask Mechila for things we might have said or for what we didn't do or say. Hashem Elokein, Dimon Me'al Kol Panim.
Very good, grandfather.
So I might be repeating a little bit what you heard, but I'm gonna bring some of the Canadian part into it as well. So I'm Miriam, I'm the oldest granddaughter. So I have the zechut to have known her for the longest. And whenever, after I moved away, I would come back to visit. Whenever Savta and I would sit together and talk, I would ask her to tell me more about her life, her parents, her childhood, her personal journey. And yesterday, in fact, in Parshat Maseh, which Howie just alluded to, we detailed the travels of Bnei Israel in the wilderness. And so too, I want to recall my grandmother's life journey. My Savta's parents came to North America from Europe. Her father was born in Newcastle, England, though his parents came from Lithuania. And he and his parents arrived in Montreal around the turn of the century. I believe it was 1903, but this is not fact checked, so we can discuss this later. And then they moved westward to Edmonton, where there was more business potential. So for those who are not aware, Edmonton is Canada, it's in Alberta. Savta's mother had come to Uniontown, Pennsylvania, as Howie mentioned earlier, where they could use their skills as furriers. But my great-grandparents, then they met in Edmonton and eventually made their way back down to Pennsylvania, where they still had family members there. My Savta was born in Johnsonburg, Pennsylvania, in 1926. And shortly thereafter, her family moved to Coalport, Pennsylvania, where her parents owned a dry goods store. And her younger brother, Phil, was born there. She started college at Penn State in 1944, as was also discussed earlier. And that was pretty unusual for a woman in those days. And I did not know about the scholarship. So that was new learning for me today. She graduated in 1948. And that same year, she married my Saba, the son of the kosher butcher in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is one of the other small towns neighboring in Pennsylvania. And when we drive down from Toronto to the DC area, it's all the stops on the route are all these towns that holds that family history. So it's really special. They moved, my grandparents, myself and Savta moved to State College, Pennsylvania for him to do graduate work at Penn State. And then they moved to Philadelphia, where my mom was born, and eventually to Silver Spring. I have so many memories of sleeping over at my Saba and Savta's house as a kid. She crocheted and knitted countless dolls, puppets, and slippers for my siblings and me. And she later made baby blankets for babies in the NICU. I feel so blessed to have had my Savta in my life for nearly 50 years. Not everyone gets that kind of gift. A grandmother who isn't just a part of your childhood, but your adult life too, who gets to know your spouse and your kids. She would call me and all of her grandchildren each Friday to tell us that she loved us and to wish us a good Shabbos. I know that at one point she was giving A-road reports to the local grandchildren. And she would always say, love to your boys and save some for yourself. She was a lifelong learner and teacher. And as has been mentioned by both my brother Danny and Howie, she was still substitute teaching when she turned 90. She swam regularly into Bolt a few years ago. She was an avid crossword puzzle solver, Scrabble player, and reader. Savta also had a unique way of seeing the world. We call them Savta-isms, those wise and funny, grounded sayings that she sprinkled into everyday conversation. It does not compute was one of them, and that she would say that quite regularly about her age, about things that didn't quite make sense to her. It'll be what it'll be. Your best is the best that you can do. And the only thing you can do about the weather is talk about it. It's a very Canadian thing to say. Her words will live on, as will her extraordinary legacy. She is the matriarch, as we heard earlier, of a family that is nothing short of remarkable, and with so many descendants. Yesterday, we entered the month of Av, about which the Mishnah states, V'shenichnas Av mima'atin b'simcha. When Av enters, we diminish in joy. Rabbi Chaim Elazar Shapira, the fifth Rebbe of the Munkach Hasidic sect, commented on this phrase. One should not think, God forbid, that one should be in complete sadness and melancholy. Joy is an obligation from the Torah. Similarly, although I'm sad that my Savta has passed away and is no longer with us to share stories and impart wisdom, I'm also quite grateful and happy for the long, meaningful life that she had and led. Savta, Yehi Zichrech Baruch. May your memory be a blessing, and may we carry your legacy forward with love.
mention has been made a few times to yesterday's Torah reading, Parshas Maseh, Parsha of the journeys of the name Israel. And it's an interesting thing to think about. Why is the emphasis the journeys and not stops, not the places they live, right? When we would talk about such things, we would probably frequently talk about the places a person lived, the places the nation lived. There are different approaches to this, but something I was thinking about really since I heard of Mrs. Binstock Avigan's passing is a very basic idea. We believe that life is about moving forward. We don't believe that life is about just staying in the same place. The greatest description of the experience of the Jewish people in the desert was their journeys. Not where they stopped, but where they were going. It's a different way of thinking about it. It's a different way of looking at things. It's a very famous idea that a number of commentators say in a different context, that people, at least in an ideal state, are referred to as holchim, people going somewhere. Angels are referred to as omdim, being standing in a certain place. And when I think about Mrs. Binstock Avigan, and certainly I hope you'll agree with me based on beautiful reflections that have been shared already, she kept on moving. She was a person who kept on moving. Just thinking about the things that we've already been told, the fact that she was a relatively young widow and she made the best and flourished in a life in that state. And then she was able to find a new partner and she made the best of that. The teaching to a very old age. I just want to share a picture that's very strong in my mind from Shabbos. Obviously, it hasn't been that way for a number of years, but she wasn't young. I remember seeing her walking up and down Lamberton on Shabbos. She's going here, she's going there. I was always so struck. And I can't speak to whether or not it computes or not. Can't speak to that. But I think what it definitely reflects is thank God, obviously she was blessed in many, many ways. But I think it reflects an outlook and an attitude. But then there's something else that I'm very struck about, which I'm very struck about her, which you've also heard about already, but I want to expand it out slightly, and I'm sure many of the non-relatives here can relate to this. We know Mrs. Binstock Avigan was quite the fighter. And I can't tell you how many times I would get a report for the years, these last years, that she had taken a turn for the worse and what was going to be. And not nearly enough. But I would try in those times to pay her a visit. And I remember it wasn't so long ago, but it wasn't in the last weeks. It was months ago. I went to visit her and I was worried that she was not so responsive at the time, but she bounced back. Mm-hmm. But I was worried that might be our last visit. I wasn't even sure. It wasn't clear to me if she would know who I was. Wasn't clear to me if we would even have a conversation at all. And thank God she was able to converse and we did a little bit of small talk. And then she started reeling off my children. I was amazed by it. Right? Is that right? It's Kanai, 3 boys and then one girl, 2 girls. I was amazed. But I think that's very much who she was. Again, obviously, primarily for her family and these beautiful, thank God, such a beautiful front area of people that are all from her mishpacha. What could be a better legacy than that? But I think this was how she was as a person in general, just valuing and treasuring these human relationships. By the way, we're in this room. I can't tell you how many pictures I have in my mind. You know what happens in Shul at the end of Kiddush. There's a few people standing schmoozing, and then there's less people than that actually bringing things back into the kitchen. there she is. This woman at the time, she was probably in her 80s, a youngster. So there's, you know, you have this person. She was schlepping kids back into the Kiddush. There's all these people literally half her age standing around schmoozing. And there's Mrs. Binstock Avigan bringing this in, going back out, bringing beautiful state. But I just want to point out what I think is a very valuable dichotomy that I think is something we can all learn from. There are people in this world who are very driven. Many of the people who are very driven don't have much time and don't have much space in their minds to think about anybody but themselves. That's what it is to be a driven person many times. But to be a person of such drive that she keeps moving and she keeps going, and yet she has so much room in her heart and mind for everybody else. It's really a beautiful combination and a beautiful, beautiful legacy. I obviously only have a very narrow picture, but I just want to echo the admiration that's already been shared by others. How inspired I've been over the years. Karen, your constant care for your mother, it's been an inspiring thing for anyone to observe. How beautiful it's been. I'm sure it's true for all the grandchildren, but when I at least saw it, when Mrs. Avigan was stronger, those times that I saw her walking up and down this Lamberton on Shabbos was almost always to walk to one of her grandchildren for a meal. And how excited she was about that, and how beautiful, what a beautiful thing you did for yourselves, for her, and for your own children. But if you don't mind my adding, I think Howie Shulman is one of a kind in all kinds of ways. But as a son-in-law, inspiration isn't even the word, if it's all right for me to say such a thing. I was really remiss at the beginning. I apologize. Really, I should have started with Eishes Chayil before we began with this. With all of your indulgence, we'll go on to the Kelma later in a minute. I would just like to say the Eishes Chayil. What a beautiful legacy of a family. She was your matriarch. So we'll just all reflect on this and think of how the words were so true for her. Eishes Chayil miyim tzav rachok mipninim michra. Batach ba lev balav shalol lo yasar. V'lasu tov v'lo ra kol yemei chayeha. Darshat semeru fishtim v'tash v'pevetz kampeha. Hoisa kaniyos socher mimerchak tavi lachma. V'tagam biyod lailav v'tinterf l'veisa v'choglen aroseha. Samamos adeva tikocheyu miprichapea natakarem. Chagra v'yos masneha v'ta'ametz v'roseha. Toama ki tov sachra lo yichve v'layla neira. Yadea shilcha v'kishor v'chapea tam chufalech. Kappa parsa lo ani v'yadea shilcha lev yom. Lo sira lebeisach mishala ki kol beisach lavush shamim. Marvadim asasala sheish yergaman levusha. Nodal ba'asharim ba'ala b'shivtoim ziknei aretz. Sadin asasava timkor v'chagor nasnolak na'ani. Oz v'hadar lefusha v'tischak liyom hacharon. Pia pascha v'chachma v'soras chesed al l'shona. Sophia lichos beisav v'lechem atzlus lo sochel. Kamu v'ner v'yashrua ba'ala v'yahalala. Rabos banos asuchayil v'yatalis al kulana. Sheker achein v'hevel yofi. Isha yiras Adonai v'sis halal. Snula mipriyoteha v'halaluha v'asharim ma'aseha. Pesach Rav Baruch. Please rise for the Kelma. Yelmolei rachamim shokein b'amiromim hamtzei minu kalachona kantei ashchina v'malos kedoshim utovim kizora kiyam masirim es nishmas Freda Shifra Bas Meir Shalchal Yolama Babur Shanakim Spalulim Yaras Paras Nishmasa we gotta eat that to Hemenu Chasa Chemalarakim Yasti Rehav Seiser Knafav Liolamim Yitzror Torah Chayim Es Nishmasa Adonai Nachlasa Bisanuach Bishaloma Mishkava Binomar Amen. This concludes this portion of the service. Burial will be at Mount Lebanon Cemetery. In a moment, we'll ask the grandsons and great-grandsons to come forward to carry out the Nifteres. We'll all accompany her out to the hearse, then we'll just follow by foot up to the top of the hill And then whoever would like to come along to Mount Lebanon is welcome to line up their cars behind the hearse. Shiva will be observed at the Shulman home on Lamberton. Mark will be here through Tuesday Shabbos. Mark will be here from Tuesday Shabbos, so we'll be having Minyanim while Mark is here, but not after. So we'll have there'll be a mincha mark at the Shulman home tonight and tomorrow night, and a Shabbos Monday morning and Tuesday morning. If the grandsons or great grandsons will please come to me. Shade says you're young and you're no matter like us, to the still I have that goal. You can still come back here, but whenever I was where was the cost of law. The sadness and I thought that said, see, I'm so there. We told those see problem, a couple of big hates, your mommy, never got we have those that she actually so we didn't. Well, it's a cattle as we're about to but that's a lot of gosh, I think that was happening. Fishing on math and we actually got to like Maxi. Yo, something more that those see you like so